The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when the sound of thundering hooves broke the peaceful silence of the Colorado frontier. It was the spring of 1868, and the McKenna family homestead sat like a small island in an ocean of endless grassland. The wooden cabin, barn, and small garden patch represented years of hard work and dreams of a better life. Inside the cabin, 22-year-old Rebecca McKenna was already awake, kneading dough for the morning bread. Her father Thomas had left before dawn to check on their cattle in the far pasture. Her mother, Catherine, was still sleeping after being up most of the night with a fever that had been troubling her for days. Rebecca paused in her work, listening to what sounded like distant thunder. But the sky was clear, painted in soft shades of pink and gold. The sound grew louder, and she realized with growing alarm that it wasn't thunder at all. It was horses, many of them riding hard toward their homestead. She dropped the dough and ran to the window, her heart racing. Through the morning mist, she could see dark figures on horseback approaching fast. Even from a distance, she could tell they weren't settlers or cavalry soldiers. These riders moved differently, and as they came closer, she could see feathers and war paint. "Mama, wake up." Rebecca shook her mother gently but urgently. "We have to hide now." Catherine opened her eyes slowly, still weak from the fever. "What is it, dear?" "Raiders coming, Mama. We need to get to the root cellar." Catherine's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded and tried to get up. Rebecca helped her mother out of bed and toward the back door of the cabin. The root cellar was about 50 yards behind the house, dug into a small hill and covered with wooden planks and earth. Thomas had built it not just for storing food, but as a hiding place in case of emergencies like this. As they stumbled across the yard, Rebecca could hear the war cries getting closer. Her mother was moving too slowly, still weak from being sick. They were only halfway to the cellar when the first riders came around the front of the cabin. "Get down, Mama." Rebecca pushed her mother behind a pile of chopped wood and looked around desperately for somewhere to hide. The raiders had spotted them. 3 warriors on painted horses were riding straight toward them, their faces fierce with war paint, their weapons raised. Rebecca helped her mother to her feet, and they ran the last few yards to the cellar, pulling open the heavy wooden door and stumbling down the earthen steps into the darkness below. The cellar was small and cramped, filled with barrels of salted meat, sacks of grain, and shelves lined with preserved fruits and vegetables. Rebecca pulled the door closed above them and slid the wooden bar into place from the inside. They crouched in the darkness, holding each other and trying to breathe quietly. Above them, they could hear the sound of horses circling the cabin, men shouting to each other in a language Rebecca didn't understand. There was the sound of breaking wood as they smashed through the front door, then crashes and bangs as they searched through the house. "Where's Papa?" Catherine whispered. "He went to check the cattle in the north pasture," Rebecca whispered back. "Maybe he saw them coming and hid. Maybe he's safe." They sat in the darkness for what felt like hours, listening to the sounds of destruction above. The raiders were taking their time, going through everything in the cabin and barn. Rebecca could smell smoke and realized they had set something on fire, probably the haystack behind the barn. Then the sounds began to fade. The horses were moving away, the voices becoming distant. Rebecca waited a long time before carefully lifting the wooden bar and cracking open the cellar door to peek outside. The cabin was still standing, but smoke was rising from behind it. She could see no movement anywhere. Slowly she opened the door wider and climbed up the steps, motioning for her mother to stay below. The yard was a mess. Broken household items were scattered everywhere. The chicken coop had been smashed, and their few chickens were nowhere to be seen. The barn door hung open, and she could see that their horse and milk cow were gone. But what worried her most was the silence. Where was her father? Had he made it to safety, or had the raiders found him in the pasture? She was about to call down to her mother that it looked safe when she heard a horse approaching from the direction the raiders had gone. Rebecca quickly ducked back into the cellar and pulled the door almost closed, leaving just a small gap to see through. A single rider was coming back toward the homestead. This warrior looked different from the others. He was older, with long black hair decorated with a single eagle feather. His face was painted with simple black and white stripes, and he rode with the confidence of a leader. The warrior dismounted near the cabin and began searching through the scattered items in the yard. He seemed to be looking for something specific or someone. Rebecca's heart pounded as she watched him move closer to their hiding place. The warrior stopped near a broken barrel and picked up a piece of torn cloth. Rebecca recognized it as part of her mother's favorite dress, torn during their desperate run to the cellar. The warrior examined it carefully, then looked directly toward the root cellar. Rebecca held her breath as he walked slowly toward their hiding place. She could hear her mother breathing heavily below, the fever making her weak and short of breath. The warrior stopped just above the cellar door and listened. Then Rebecca heard something that made her blood run cold. Her mother was having trouble breathing, and the sound was getting worse. Catherine tried to muffle the noise with her hands, but the fever and exertion had taken their toll. The warrior heard it too. He knelt down and found the edge of the wooden door, then pulled it open with a sudden motion. Sunlight flooded into the cellar, and Rebecca found herself looking up into the painted face of a Cheyenne warrior. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then her mother's breathing became even more labored. "Please," Catherine gasped from below. "I can't breathe." The warrior looked confused, then concerned. He gestured for Rebecca to come up out of the cellar, and when she hesitated, he made the gesture more firmly but not aggressively. Rebecca climbed up the steps slowly, her hands shaking. Her mother was in real trouble. The combination of fever, fear, and the stuffy air in the cellar had made her breathing very difficult. Rebecca knelt beside her and tried to help her sit up. "Please, I can't breathe." Catherine gasped again, her face pale and sweaty. The warrior seemed to understand that something was seriously wrong. He looked around and saw a cloth that had been torn from Catherine's dress and was now twisted around her arm, probably from when they fell while running. It was wrapped too tightly and was cutting off circulation, making her whole arm swell. Without hesitation, the warrior knelt down and carefully cut the cloth away with his knife. As soon as the pressure was released, Catherine's breathing began to improve. She looked up at the warrior with surprise and gratitude. But then something strange happened. The warrior's expression changed from concern to complete shock. He stared at Catherine's face as if he had seen a ghost, then looked more carefully at Rebecca. The warrior sat back on his heels and spoke a single word in his own language, then shook his head in disbelief. He looked at Catherine again, studying her features carefully. "You," he said in broken English, "you help my brother." Rebecca and her mother looked at each other in confusion. Neither of them understood what he meant. The warrior touched a small leather pouch hanging from his neck, then pulled out a thin piece of carved bone decorated with beads. He held it up for them to see. "My brother, very sick. White woman help him. You are that woman." Catherine squinted at the carved bone, and slowly recognition dawned in her eyes. 3 years ago, when they had first arrived in Colorado, they had stopped at a trading post for supplies. There had been a young native man there, very ill with fever, and no one would help him because of the growing tensions between settlers and tribes. But Catherine had always been a healer. She couldn't stand to see anyone suffering, regardless of who they were. She had used her knowledge of herbs and medicine to treat the young man's fever and stayed with him for 2 days until he recovered. The young man had been so grateful that he had given her a small carved bone ornament as a gift. Catherine had kept it for a while, but during one of their moves it had been lost. "Little Hawk," Catherine said, suddenly remembering the name. "His name was Little Hawk." The warrior's eyes widened. "Yes, Little Hawk, my brother." His expression became sad. He died last winter. Soldiers come to our village. Little Hawk try to protect the children. Soldiers kill him." The sadness in the warrior's voice was unmistakable. Rebecca realized they were in the presence of someone who had lost a beloved family member in the ongoing conflict between settlers and native tribes. "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly. "He was a good young man. I was glad I could help him." The warrior nodded. "Little Hawk tell everyone about kind white woman. He say she save his life when no one else care. He say if he ever see her again, he protect her like she protect him." The warrior stood up and looked around at the destruction in the yard. "My warriors, they angry. Many of our people killed by soldiers. They come here for revenge. But I cannot hurt the woman who saved my brother." Rebecca realized the incredible situation they were in. This warrior, who was clearly the leader of the raiding party, felt obligated to protect them. The journey to the Cheyenne camp took 3 days, and every step felt like a walk into the unknown for Rebecca and her mother, Catherine. The warrior who had saved them rode mostly in silence, occasionally speaking in his own language to his horse or scanning the horizon for signs of danger. Rebecca walked beside the horse, her feet already sore from the unfamiliar terrain. She had never walked so far in her life, and her soft shoes made for indoor work were quickly wearing thin. Her mother rode on the horse, still weak from her fever, though she was slowly getting better. On the first night they made camp in a small grove of cottonwood trees near a stream. The warrior, who had told them his name was Standing Wolf, built a small fire and shared his dried meat and corn cakes with them. The food was different from what they were used to, but Rebecca was too hungry to be picky. "Why are you helping us?" Rebecca asked as they sat around the small fire. "Your people and our people are fighting. Aren't we supposed to be enemies?" Standing Wolf poked at the fire with a stick and was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his English was careful and slow, as if he was choosing each word with care. "Little Hawk was my youngest brother," he said. "When he was born, our mother was very sick. The medicine man said both mother and baby would die, but they both lived, and our mother said Little Hawk was blessed by the spirits." He pulled out the small leather pouch again and held it in his hands. "Little Hawk was always kind to everyone, even our enemies. When other warriors wanted to fight, Little Hawk wanted to find peace. He said fighting only brings more fighting." Catherine listened carefully. "He was special, wasn't he?" "Yes, very special. When he got sick at the trading post and your people turned him away, Little Hawk was ready to die. He said maybe it was time for him to join the spirits. But then you came." Standing Wolf looked directly at Catherine. "You did not see an enemy. You saw a sick person who needed help." Little Hawk never forgot that. "He told me many times that there are good people in all tribes, even the white tribe." Rebecca felt a strange mix of emotions. She was grateful for her mother's kindness years ago, but she was also confused about this whole situation. "If he believed in peace, why are you raiding our settlements?" Standing Wolf's expression became hard, because peace did not work. "We tried to live in peace. We signed treaties with your government, but more and more settlers came and they took our land. They killed our buffalo. They broke every promise." He pointed to a scar on his arm. "This is from when soldiers attacked our village last winter. They said we had stolen cattle, but we had not. They burned our lodges and killed women and children. Little Hawk died trying to protect the little ones." The pain in his voice was clear, and Rebecca began to understand the anger that drove the raids. These weren't just random attacks by savage people, as she had been taught. These were acts of desperation by people who had lost everything. "So why don't you just leave us to die?" Rebecca asked. "It would be easier for you." Standing Wolf smiled sadly. "Because Little Hawk's spirit would never forgive me. And because he was right, fighting only brings more fighting. Maybe protecting you will honor his memory better than more killing." The second day of travel was harder. They had to move carefully to avoid both army patrols and other war parties. Standing Wolf explained that not all warriors would understand his decision to protect white captives, especially not right now when emotions were running so high. "Some of my own warriors are angry with me," he admitted. "They think I am being weak. They want revenge for all the wrongs done to our people." Rebecca noticed how carefully he chose their path, keeping to low ground and using trees and hills to hide their movement. He was clearly worried about being seen by the wrong people. During a rest stop beside a small creek, Catherine asked something that had been bothering her. "What will happen to us when we reach your village? Will we be prisoners?" Standing Wolf considered this question for a long time. "You will be under my protection, but I cannot make everyone happy about this. Some people have lost family members to white soldiers. They may not understand why I brought you." "Will we be able to leave?" Rebecca asked, not right away. "Too dangerous. Army is looking for you now. They think my warriors killed you. If you appear suddenly, they will ask questions I cannot answer without causing trouble for my people." Rebecca realized they were caught in an impossible situation. They couldn't go back to their old life because it no longer existed. And they couldn't move forward because they would be in danger from both sides of this conflict. That night, around another small campfire, Standing Wolf began teaching them some basic words in his language. "If you are going to live with my people even for a short time, you must show respect by trying to learn our ways." He pointed to himself. "Heisha," he said. "Man." Then he pointed to Catherine. "Higo, woman." To Rebecca, "Moenoha," young woman. Rebecca repeated the words, trying to get the pronunciation right. It was difficult, with sounds that were completely unfamiliar to her tongue. Standing Wolf also taught them some basic signs and gestures. How to show respect to elders. how to ask for food or water, how to say please and thank you without words. Most important, he said seriously, when we reach the village, you must stay close to me or to my grandmother. Whispering Wind. She is very respected, and if she protects you, others will respect that. On the third day, they finally saw the Cheyenne village in the distance. It was larger than Rebecca had expected, with dozens of cone-shaped lodges arranged in a rough circle near a river. Smoke rose from many fires, and she could see people moving about their daily activities. Children were playing near the water. Women were working on hides and crafts, and men were tending to horses in a large corral. It looked peaceful and organized, nothing like the savage wilderness she had been told to expect. But as they got closer, Rebecca noticed that the people were stopping their work and staring at them. Word was spreading quickly through the village that Standing Wolf had returned with white captives. By the time they reached the edge of the village, a crowd had gathered. Rebecca could see anger and suspicion on many faces. Some of the younger warriors looked especially hostile, and she heard heated discussions in the Cheyenne language. Standing Wolf dismounted and helped Catherine down from the horse. He spoke to the crowd in his own language, clearly explaining the situation. Rebecca could tell he was talking about Little Hawk because he held up the carved bone ornament several times. An old woman pushed through the crowd, leaning heavily on a walking stick carved with intricate designs. Her hair was completely white, braided with colorful beads, and her face was deeply lined with age. But her eyes were sharp and intelligent. This had to be Whispering Wind, Standing Wolf's grandmother. The old woman walked directly to Catherine and looked at her carefully for a long moment. Then she spoke to Standing Wolf in their language, asking what sounded like questions. Standing Wolf answered respectfully, and Rebecca could tell he was explaining about her mother helping Little Hawk years ago. Whispering Wind nodded slowly, then surprised everyone by speaking in clear English. "You are the woman who saved Little Hawk's life at the trading post." Catherine nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I did what I could for him. He was a good young man." Whispering Wind smiled. "Little Hawk told me about you many times. He said you had healing hands and a kind heart. He said you treated him like family, not like an enemy." The old woman turned to the crowd and spoke in Cheyenne. Rebecca couldn't understand the words, but the tone was firm and authoritative. Several people nodded and began to disperse. "What did she say?" Rebecca whispered to Standing Wolf. "She told them that you are under her protection because of the debt we owe your mother. She said anyone who harms you will answer to her personally." Whispering Wind gestured for them to follow her toward one of the larger lodges near the center of the village. As they walked, she continued talking to Catherine. "I have heard many stories about white settlers," she said. "Most are about greed and cruelty. But Little Hawk's story was different. He said there are good people among your tribe, just as there are good people among ours." They reached the lodge, and Whispering Wind pulled back the entrance flap. Inside, Rebecca was surprised by how comfortable and well-organized everything was. Colorful blankets and furs covered the floor, and various household items were arranged neatly around the circular space. "You will stay here with me," Whispering Wind said. "My lodge is respected, and you will be safe here while we figure out what to do with you." As they settled in, Rebecca realized that her life had changed completely in just a few days. A week ago, she had been a settler's daughter looking forward to helping her family build a new life on the frontier. Now she was a captive in a Cheyenne village, dependent on the kindness of people she had been taught to fear. But as she watched Whispering Wind carefully prepare herbal tea for her mother's lingering cough, and as she remembered Standing Wolf's gentle care during their journey, Rebecca began to wonder if everything she had been taught about native people was wrong. That night, lying on soft furs in Whispering Wind's lodge, Rebecca listened to the sounds of the village settling down for the night. Children's laughter, adults talking quietly around fires. 3 weeks had passed since Rebecca and her mother Catherine arrived at the Cheyenne village, and slowly, they were beginning to understand the rhythm of life there. Each morning, Whispering Wind would wake them gently and share a simple breakfast of corn porridge and dried berries. Catherine's health had improved dramatically under the old woman's care, and Rebecca had started helping with daily tasks around the lodge. It was during one of these quiet mornings that Whispering Wind decided it was time for a serious conversation. "Today, you will learn more about why you are really here," she said, settling down on a colorful woven mat with her morning tea. "There are things Standing Wolf has not told you. things that are difficult to speak about. Rebecca looked up from the moccasins she was learning to repair. Over the past weeks, her hands had become rougher from the unfamiliar work, but she was getting better at the intricate beadwork and stitching. "What kind of things?" Catherine asked, setting down her own sewing. Whispering Wind was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea as if looking for the right words. "Little Hawk died 6 months ago. But not from sickness and not in battle, as you might expect." The old woman's voice became heavy with sadness. "He was killed during a peace mission. He had gone to the army fort with 2 other young men, carrying a white flag, trying to arrange a meeting to discuss the return of stolen horses. The soldiers shot them before they could even speak." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. "But that's not how war is supposed to work. You don't shoot people carrying white flags. War has no rules when one side sees the other as less than human," Whispering Wind said bitterly. The army commander claimed they thought it was a trick, that the white flag was just a way to get close enough to attack. Catherine put down her sewing completely. "How do you know this?" "Because one of the young men lived long enough to crawl back to our hunting party and tell what happened. He died 2 days later from his wounds." Whispering Wind reached into a leather pouch and pulled out something wrapped in soft deerskin. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a necklace made of carved bone beads, each one decorated with tiny symbols. This was Little Hawk's. He made it himself when he returned from the trading post where your mother helped him. Each bead represents something he learned that day about the possibility of peace between our peoples. She handed the necklace to Catherine, who took it with trembling hands. "He wore this when he went to the fort. The soldiers sent it back with his body, along with a message that any other peace missions would end the same way." Rebecca felt tears starting to form in her eyes. The young man her mother had helped, who had believed in the possibility of friendship between their peoples, had died trying to make that dream a reality. Standing Wolf was supposed to go on that mission too, Whispering Wind continued. But Little Hawk insisted on going instead. He said that as the younger brother, it was his place to take the risk. He saved Standing Wolf's life by taking his place. Now Rebecca understood the complex emotion she had seen in Standing Wolf's face during their journey. It wasn't just grief for a lost brother. It was guilt for being alive when Little Hawk was dead, and anger at a world that had killed someone who only wanted peace. "Is that why Standing Wolf saved us?" Rebecca asked. "Because he feels guilty?" Whispering Wind shook her head. "No, child. Standing Wolf saved you because Little Hawk's death taught him something important. He realized that if he became like the soldiers who killed his brother, then Little Hawk's dream of peace would truly die." Over the following days, Rebecca began to see Standing Wolf differently. She noticed how he would sometimes stand at the edge of the village, staring toward the horizon with a sadness that seemed too deep for words. She saw how gently he treated the village children, especially the youngest ones who reminded him of Little Hawk, and she began to understand the impossible position he was in as a war leader who no longer believed in war. One evening, as Rebecca was learning to prepare traditional medicines with Whispering Wind, Standing Wolf came to the lodge looking troubled. "Grandmother," he said in English, so Rebecca and Catherine could understand. "Scouts have seen army patrols getting closer. They are searching for the missing white women from the McKenna homestead." Whispering Wind looked up from the herbs she was grinding. "How close?" 2 days' ride, maybe less. And they are not alone. They have Crow Scouts with them, warriors who know how to track in this country." Rebecca felt her heart start racing. "What does that mean for us?" Standing Wolf sat down heavily on a fur mat. "It means we have to make some difficult decisions. If the army finds this village, they will attack. They will not ask questions about whether you are here willingly or as captives. Can't we just go to them and explain?" Catherine asked. "Tell them that you saved our lives?" Standing Wolf shook his head. "You do not understand how things are now. The army commanders, they do not want explanations. They want excuses to attack our villages. If they find you here, they will say we kidnapped you, and they will use that as reason to kill everyone." Whispering Wind set down her grinding stone. "There is more, isn't there?" Standing Wolf nodded grimly. "The patrol is led by Captain Bradley Morrison. He is known for his hatred of our people. Last year, he attacked a peaceful village of Arapaho families, claiming they had stolen cattle. 60 people died, mostly women and children." Rebecca remembered hearing that name before. Her father had mentioned Captain Morrison with a mixture of respect and uneasiness. saying he was effective but perhaps too harsh in his methods. Morrison has orders to find you and bring back proof that you are safe, Standing Wolf continued. But he also has orders to punish any Indian village that might have been involved in raids on white settlements. So he's looking for an excuse to attack you, Rebecca said, understanding the situation. Yes, and if he finds 2 white women in our village, that will be all the excuse he needs. Whispering Wind stood up and walked to the entrance of the lodge, looking out at the peaceful village scene. Children were playing, women were preparing the evening meal, and men were returning from hunting. Normal life which could be destroyed in a matter of hours. What are our choices? She asked quietly. Standing, Wolf looked at Rebecca and Catherine carefully before answering. I can take you away from the village and hide you until the soldiers pass. But if Morrison finds the village anyway and attacks, I will not be here to help defend it. What's the other choice? Rebecca asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. You could walk into the army camp and tell them you escaped from us. Tell them we treated you badly and you got away during the night. This would protect the village, but it would make you the enemy again, Catherine finished. It would undo everything we've learned about each other. Standing Wolf nodded. And it would mean the last part of Little Hawk's dream dies. The part that said people from different tribes could trust each other. Rebecca looked around the lodge that had become her home. 3 weeks ago, she couldn't have imagined living among native people. Now the thought of leaving felt like abandoning family. There has to be another way, she said, whispering. Wind turned back to them with a thoughtful expression. Perhaps there is, but it would be very dangerous and it would require great courage from all of us. What do you mean? Standing Wolf asked. What if Rebecca and Catherine don't hide from Captain Morrison? What if they meet him, but not as escaped captives? Rebecca felt confused. I don't understand. Whispering Wind sat back down and looked directly at her. What if you meet him as representatives of this village? What if you tell him the truth about what happened and ask him to listen to our side of the story? Standing Wolf looked shocked. Grandmother, that is too dangerous. Morrison is not known for listening to anyone. But he might listen to 2 white women who have lived among us and can speak for our character, Whispering Wind said. Especially if one of them is the woman who saved Little Hawk's life. Catherine looked thoughtful. It could work. If we approach him under a flag of truce with a story he can believe. But what if he doesn't listen? Rebecca asked. What if he just arrests us and attacks the village anyway? Whispering Wind smiled sadly. Then we will have tried to honor Little Hawk's memory by seeking peace instead of preparing for war. And sometimes that is all we can do. Standing Wolf was quiet for a long time, clearly struggling with the decision. Finally he spoke. If we do this, there can be no mistakes. Morrison will be suspicious of any story that makes our people look good. The truth will have to be told very carefully. What do you mean? Rebecca asked. You will have to tell him that you were captives, but that you were treated well because of your mother's past kindness to Little Hawk. You will have to make it clear that our protection of you was based on honor, not weakness. Catherine nodded slowly, and we'll have to convince him that attacking this village would be wrong, without making it sound like we're taking your side against our own people. Exactly. It must sound like you are grateful to be rescued, but that you want justice for people who showed you mercy. Rebecca realized what they were planning. They would have to walk a very thin line, telling the truth in a way that would satisfy Captain Morrison's expectations, while still protecting the village that had become their home. The morning air was crisp and filled with tension, as Rebecca, Catherine, and Standing Wolf prepared to meet Captain Morrison's patrol at the river crossing. The entire village had been awake since before dawn, and Rebecca could feel the anxiety in every face she saw. Whispering Wind had painted traditional symbols of peace on a piece of white cloth that would serve as their flag of truce. The symbols were beautiful and intricate, but Rebecca wondered if they would mean anything to soldiers who saw all native markings as signs of hostility. Remember, Standing Wolf said as they prepared to leave, you must let them believe you are grateful to be rescued. Do not show too much friendship toward me, or Morrison will become suspicious. Catherine adjusted the simple dress that Whispering Wind had made for her. After weeks of wearing Cheyenne clothing, the familiar style felt strange. What if he asks questions we haven't prepared for? Then tell the truth, but carefully, Standing Wolf replied. Morrison is not stupid. If our story sounds too perfect, he will know we planned it. As they walked toward the river crossing, Rebecca noticed how different Standing Wolf looked this morning. He had painted his face with simple white stripes of peace instead of the black war paint she had first seen him wear. He carried no weapons except a single knife, and he moved with the careful dignity of someone approaching a dangerous negotiation. The river crossing was about an hour's walk from the village, across open grassland that offered no place to hide. If this meeting went badly, there would be nowhere to run. They reached the crossing just as the sun was approaching its highest point in the sky. The river was shallow here, with a rocky bottom that made it easy for horses and wagons to cross. It was also the perfect place for an ambush, which was probably why Morrison had chosen to approach from this direction. Standing Wolf pointed to a small rise about 200 yards from the river. "There. We will wait there with the white flag where they can see us clearly." As they climbed the low hill, Rebecca could see dust rising in the distance. The army patrol was approaching, and it looked larger than she had expected. She counted at least 20 soldiers plus several native scouts riding ahead of the main group. "Those are Crow warriors," Standing Wolf said, noticing her attention. "They have been fighting my people for many generations. They will not trust anything I say." The patrol reached the far side of the river and stopped. Rebecca could see a man in an officer's uniform studying them through a brass telescope. This had to be Captain Morrison. After several minutes of observation, Morrison rode forward with 2 soldiers and one of the Crow scouts. They crossed the river carefully, their weapons ready but not directly threatening. Captain Morrison was a tall, lean man with gray hair and cold blue eyes. His uniform was neat and military precise, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed, without question. He stopped his horse about 50 feet away and called out in a voice that carried easily across the distance, "I am Captain Bradley Morrison of the United States Army. I am looking for 2 white women, Rebecca and Catherine McKenna, who were taken from their homestead 3 weeks ago." Rebecca stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Captain Morrison, I am Rebecca McKenna, and this is my mother, Catherine. We are safe and unharmed." Morrison's eyes narrowed as he studied them. "You appear to be traveling freely with this warrior. Are you his prisoners or his allies?" The question was clearly a test, and Rebecca knew that her answer would determine everything that followed. "We are neither, sir," she said carefully. "This man, Standing Wolf, saved our lives when raiders attacked our homestead. My father was killed by soldiers before the warriors even reached our house." Morrison's expression showed surprise. "Soldiers killed your father?" "What soldiers?" Catherine spoke up. "We don't know, Captain. We heard gunshots from the direction where my husband went to check our cattle. When the raiders found us hiding, they told us he was already dead." Standing Wolf remained silent, but Rebecca could see the tension in his posture. They were walking into dangerous territory with this conversation. Morrison dismounted and walked closer, his hand resting on his pistol. "If this warrior saved your lives, why didn't he bring you to the nearest fort immediately?" Rebecca had prepared for this question. "Because he recognized my mother, sir. 3 years ago at a trading post, she helped cure his younger brother of a dangerous fever. He felt honor-bound to protect us because of that kindness." "Honor-bound," Morrison repeated skeptically. "These people understand honor?" The contempt in his voice made Rebecca angry, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Yes, sir, they do. Standing Wolf risked his own safety to bring us to his village, where we have been treated with respect and kindness." Morrison walked around them slowly, studying their appearance. Rebecca knew they looked healthy and unharmed, which supported their story, but she could see suspicion in his eyes. "Why should I believe any of this?" he asked finally. "For all I know, you've been converted to their cause and are now working against your own people." It was Catherine who answered, and her voice was strong and clear. "Captain Morrison, I am 43 years old. I have buried 1 child, raised another, and nursed a husband through 2 bouts of pneumonia. I know the difference between kindness and manipulation." She held up Little Hawk's necklace, which Whispering Wind had insisted she bring. "This belonged to the young man I helped at the trading post. His name was Little Hawk, and he was Standing Wolf's younger brother. Little Hawk was killed 6 months ago while carrying a white flag to an army fort, trying to arrange a peace meeting." Morrison's expression changed slightly. "What fort?" "Fort Collins," Standing Wolf said quietly, speaking for the first time. Little Hawk and 2 other young men went to speak with Commander Phillips about stolen horses. They were shot before they could deliver their message. Morrison looked uncomfortable. Commander Phillips reported that incident differently. He said 3 warriors approached the fort in what appeared to be a raid. They carried a white flag, Standing Wolf said simply, just as we do today. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rebecca realized they were at a crucial moment. Morrison could either listen to what they were saying, or he could dismiss it and proceed with whatever aggressive plans he had made. The Crow Scout rode closer and spoke to Morrison in English. "Captain, this warrior is Standing Wolf. He is war chief of the Northern Cheyenne Band. Very dangerous. His warriors have raided many settlements." Morrison's hand moved closer to his weapon. "Is this true? Are you the war chief they call Standing Wolf?" Standing Wolf straightened his shoulders. "I am, but I did not come here to fight. I came to return these women safely to their people, and to speak truth about what happened to Little Hawk. Why should I trust the word of a man who has killed white settlers?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rebecca knew that Standing Wolf could have responded with anger, pointing out the many atrocities committed by soldiers against native villages. Instead, he chose a different path. "Because I could have killed these women, but I chose to protect them instead. Because I could have hidden from you, but I chose to meet you in the open. Because my brother died believing that peace was possible, and I do not want his death to be meaningless." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the situation. Rebecca could see that he had not expected this kind of conversation. He had probably planned to either rescue 2 grateful white women or punish their captors. He hadn't planned for a complex moral situation that challenged his assumptions. "Even if I believe your story," Morrison said finally, "it doesn't change the fact that your warriors have been raiding settlements. People have died." "Yes," Standing Wolf agreed. "People have died on both sides. The question is whether more people must die or whether we can find another way." Rebecca decided to take a risk. "Captain Morrison, I've lived in that village for 3 weeks. I've seen how they care for their children, how they honor their elders, how they share what little they have with each other. These are not savage people. They're families just like ours were." Morrison's eyes flashed with anger. "Families don't raid homesteads and kill innocent settlers. And armies don't shoot men carrying white flags," Catherine said quietly. "But both have happened. The question is what we do now." The captain looked back at his soldiers, then at the Crow Scout, then at the 3 people standing before him with their flag of truce. Rebecca could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to handle a situation that didn't fit any of his usual patterns. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. Standing Wolf stepped forward. "A meeting. Between your commanders and our chiefs, a real meeting with guarantees of safety for both sides. A chance to speak truth about what has happened and what needs to happen to stop the killing. And if I refuse, then you will take these women back to your world, and I will return to mine, and the killing will continue until one side or the other is completely destroyed." Morrison was quiet for a very long time. Rebecca could hear the river flowing over the rocks, the wind rustling the grass, the distant calls of birds. Normal sounds of a world that continued to exist despite the human conflicts that seemed so important. The 2 weeks following the meeting with Captain Morrison were filled with an anxious kind of hope. Rebecca and Catherine had chosen to remain in the Cheyenne village, while they waited to see if Morrison would keep his word about carrying their message to his superiors. Standing Wolf had given them a choice: return with the soldiers to the white world, or stay and help build the bridge of understanding that Little Hawk had dreamed of. They had chosen to stay. During those weeks, Rebecca threw herself into learning everything she could about Cheyenne life and customs. She helped Whispering Wind with her medicinal work, learning which plants could heal wounds and which could ease pain. She practiced the language until she could hold simple conversations with the village children. Most importantly, she began to understand the deep spiritual connection the Cheyenne people felt to the land around them. "Everything is connected," Whispering Wind explained one morning as they gathered herbs near the river. "The grass feeds the buffalo feed the people, and when the people die, they feed the earth that grows the grass. Your people see land as something to own. We see it as something we belong to." Catherine had become something of a village doctor, combining her knowledge of frontier medicine with traditional Cheyenne healing practices. Word of her skills had spread to other bands, and people sometimes traveled for days to seek her help. But despite these peaceful activities, everyone knew that their situation was temporary. The conflict between whites and native tribes was growing larger every day, and their small village could not remain isolated from it forever. The news came on a cold morning in early October. Scouts reported that a large army force was approaching from 3 directions, led by Captain Morrison and 2 other officers. It was not a peaceful delegation coming to discuss terms. It was a military operation designed to surround and capture the village. Standing Wolf called an emergency council meeting, and for the first time since arriving at the village, Rebecca and Catherine were invited to participate as full members of the community. "The soldiers come with orders to relocate our people to a reservation in Oklahoma," Standing Wolf announced to the gathered adults. "Any who resist will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly." An older warrior named Black Hawk stood up angrily. "This is what comes of trusting white promises. They used our women as spies to learn the location of our village." Rebecca felt her face burn with shame and anger. "That's not true. We never told them where the village was." "Then how do they know exactly where to find us?" Black Hawk demanded. Standing Wolf raised his hand for silence. "Morrison did not learn our location from Rebecca and Catherine. He learned it from the Crow Scouts who have been tracking our movements for weeks. The soldiers were always going to find us eventually." Whispering Wind stood up slowly, leaning on her walking stick. Despite her age, her voice carried clearly across the gathering. "The question is not how they found us," she said. "The question is what we do now. Do we fight and die here, or do we try something different?" "What else can we do?" asked another warrior. "They outnumber us and they have surrounded us." Rebecca surprised herself by standing up to address the council. "What if we don't fight or surrender? What if we make them choose?" Standing Wolf looked at her with interest. "What do you mean?" "What if Rebecca and I go to meet Captain Morrison again?" Catherine suggested, understanding her daughter's idea. "What if we tell him that we've been living here freely, and that we're witnesses to how these people really live?" Black Hawk scoffed. "Why would white soldiers care about the testimony of white women? They will say you have been influenced by us." "Maybe," Rebecca admitted. "But what if we don't just talk to the soldiers? What if we make sure other people hear our story too?" Whispering Wind smiled with understanding. "You mean the newspaper writers who travel with the army looking for stories about the Indian wars?" "Exactly. Captain Morrison told us there are reporters with this expedition, men who write for newspapers back east. What if they heard a different story than they expected?" Standing Wolf looked thoughtful. "It is a dangerous plan. If it fails, we will have given up any chance of fighting our way out. If we fight, most of us will die anyway," pointed out an older woman named Gentle Rain. "At least this way, our story might survive even if we don't." The debate continued for hours, but in the end the council voted to try Rebecca's plan. It was risky, but it offered something that fighting could not: the possibility that their side of the story might reach people who had never heard it before. The next morning, Rebecca, Catherine, and Standing Wolf walked out of the village under a white flag, heading toward the army lines. This time, they were accompanied by 2 other village elders and 3 children, including a little girl named Morningstar who was Little Hawk's niece. The army had made camp about a mile from the village, positioned to prevent any escape. Rebecca could see sentries watching their approach through telescopes, and she wondered what those soldiers thought of the unusual delegation walking toward them. Captain Morrison met them at the edge of the army camp, but this time he was not alone. 2 other officers flanked him, and Rebecca noticed several men in civilian clothes taking notes and making sketches. These had to be the newspaper reporters. Mrs. McKenna, Morrison said formally. "I'm surprised to see you still with these people. I had hoped you would have returned to civilization by now." "We are in civilization, Captain," Catherine replied calmly. "We're just in a different part of it than you're used to." One of the reporters, a young man with ink-stained fingers, stepped forward. "Excuse me, ma'am, but are you saying you've been living with these Indians voluntarily?" "For the past month and a half, yes," Rebecca answered. "After they saved our lives when our homestead was attacked." The reporter scribbled frantically in his notebook. "And how have you been treated?" Rebecca looked around at the armed soldiers surrounding them, then at the small group of Cheyenne people who had risked everything to come here with her. "We've been treated like family," she said clearly. "We've been fed when food was scarce, protected when we were in danger, and taught skills that have probably saved our lives. Most importantly, we've been shown a way of life that values wisdom over wealth and community over individual gain." One of the other officers, a colonel with graying hair, stepped forward. That's a very romantic view, miss, but it doesn't change the fact that these people have been raiding settlements and killing innocent civilians. Standing Wolf spoke for the first time. Colonel, may I ask how many women and children have died in the raids you speak of? The colonel looked annoyed. I don't have exact numbers, but I do, Standing Wolf interrupted. In the past year, 12 white civilians have been killed in raids by warriors from all the Cheyenne bands combined. In the same time, your soldiers have killed over 200 of our people, including 63 women and children. Those were military operations against hostile forces, the colonel protested. Like the operation that killed my brother while he carried a white flag? The reporters were writing furiously now, clearly fascinated by this unexpected exchange. Rebecca realized that Standing Wolf was doing something very clever. He was making the army officers defend actions that would sound terrible to readers back east. Catherine stepped forward and addressed the reporters directly. Gentlemen, I've lived on the frontier for 4 years and I've seen violence from both sides. But I've also seen something else during my time with these people. I've seen a community that takes care of its elderly, that teaches its children to respect all living things, and that makes decisions based on what's best for the whole group, not just for individuals. One of the reporters asked, Mrs. McKenna, are you saying you prefer Indian society to white society? Catherine considered the question carefully. I'm saying that both societies have things to teach each other. The question is whether we're willing to learn, or whether we're going to keep killing each other until only one side is left. Little Morning Star, who had been standing quietly beside Standing Wolf, suddenly walked forward and offered something to Captain Morrison. It was a small doll made of corn husks, dressed in traditional Cheyenne clothing. My grandmother made this for me, she said in carefully practiced English. She said to give it to the soldier chief to remember that Indian children play with dolls just like white children. The simple gesture seemed to affect Morrison more than all the speeches and arguments. He knelt down to accept the doll, and for a moment his military composure slipped. What's your name, little one? He asked gently. Morning Star. My uncle was Little Hawk. He said white people and Indian people could be friends if they tried. Morrison looked up at Standing Wolf. Your brother's child. Standing Wolf nodded. She is all I have left of Little Hawk. If you take our people to the reservation in Oklahoma, she will grow up in a place where her ancestors never walked, eating food her people never ate, speaking only the language of those who conquered her. One of the reporters asked, What's the alternative, Chief? The government has made its decision. The alternative is what we are doing right now, Whispering Wind said, speaking for the first time, talking to each other like human beings instead of enemies.